Hello, my name is Bob Mueller, and on Monday, October 1st, 2012, we celebrated the 200th anniversary of the establishment of St. Genevieve County. We had a wonderful ceremony in front of the courthouse in the morning, and later that afternoon I gave a brief history of the county and various things that have happened over those 200 years, various personalities, schooling, just a lot of little trivia about the county that I've been able to collect over the past few years. I hope you'll enjoy the presentation. I look forward to maybe in the future finding out more information about our county and being able to share with it in another presentation. So enjoy the show.
I'd like to welcome you to our celebration commemorating the 200th anniversary of the establishment of St. Genevieve County. To begin our celebration and to honor our great country, our great state, and our great county, I ask the St. Genevieve VFW Post 2210 Honor Guard to post the colors. Please stand for the posting of the colors and remain standing for the singing of the Star Spangled Banner by the Lynn Rose Terry.
Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof to the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
You may be seated. St. Genevieve's been blessed with musicians and singers for over 200 years, and I think Lynn is at the top of that, so give her another day. For those of you that know me, you know I can't go any place without talking about history or genealogy or something, so you're going to get to hear a brief history of our county. During the Spanish and Second French period of our history, the area of Upper Louisiana was made up of 6 districts: St. Charles, St. Louis, St. Genevieve, New Bourbon, Cape Girardeau, and New Madrid. New Bourbon was added. It was a little gerrymandering by De La Souza. He wanted his own district, so he convinced the governor in New Orleans to do it. In 1805, after the Louisiana Purchase, we went back to just 5 districts. And that's the part of the Louisiana Purchase that was contained within the present state of Missouri. But in 1812, an act of Congress established this area as the territory of Missouri. And it was so named until Missouri became a state in 1821. On October 1st, 1812, 200 years ago today, the territorial governor formally established the first 5 counties in Missouri. those being St. Charles, St. Louis, St. Genevieve, Cape Girardeau, and New Madrid. Now, New Madrid went all the way down into probably the upper third of Arkansas at the time. It wasn't until later that they started to split off Arkansas from Missouri. As the population of Missouri continued to grow, I think in about 1810 we only had 20,000 people in the state, or in the territory. St. Genevieve County was reformed into other counties. I think they would establish a county seat every distance where it was 1 day's ride, or so far that a person could go. In 1813, right after the territory of Missouri was established, Washington County was broken off. Then Jefferson and Madison County in 1818, Perry County in 1820, and St. Francis County in 1821. In 1857, Iron County was established from parts of what was the original St. Genevieve County. Our northern boundary was the Merrimack River. Our southern boundary was Apple Creek. I'm not sure what the western boundary was. They just kind of didn't define that. So if you're here from Washington County, Jefferson County, Madison, St. Francis, Perry, or Iron County, welcome home. The first courts were held in private homes, and then the old brick house over here. In 1805, the court approved the building of a jail on the courthouse square. It was actually located just to the left of us here, on the other side of the Chamber of Commerce building. We actually have a description of the logs, the stones, the bars, all of that, which I'll talk about later this afternoon at a presentation. In 1814, we established our first farmers market just to my right, your left. It was 16 feet by 50 feet long, and it kind of faced the old brick. Our first courthouse was built in 1822 and contained a courtroom on the first floor, 3 offices, and a gallery on the second floor. If you all think it's tight in the courthouse now, it was probably really tight then. These rooms and stair arrangements were modified in 1853 and 1855. In 1875, these 2 side small buildings were built. First, the building on the left was a fireproof county clerk's building. They always worried about fire there. And the building on this corner over here was our second jail. Actually, down in our old town on the Mississippi, they built a jail in 1771, and we have a description of how they built that, but it's in French, and I can't read that. In 1885, they decided that the old courthouse was becoming dilapidated and needed a repair, and somehow the county court, finagle's not the right word, but they eventually tore it down and built this courthouse. There was an addition in 1915 added to the back, and in 1987 another addition was added to the right side of the building. Over the last 50 years, we've added a new jail, and I think we're on our second addition to that jail, a county hospital, care facility, health department, county community center, 911 center, water district facilities, and a number of other, I forgot the ambulance district too, and I'm sure I've forgotten some of our departments, but the county has grown. In 1830, we were about 2,000 people, and we're about 18,000 people now. For most of our history, our county's been managed by a county court, but in the late 1980s, we decided to go to a presiding commissioner and commissioners from 2 districts, District 1 and 2, and we've been operating that way since. And that's just a little bit about the brief history of our county. This afternoon I'll be doing a presentation, but I found when I started investigating our history, you can't do 200 years in 1 hour or 1.5. It's just not going to happen. So you'll get parts of it then. But I'd like to introduce some of our special guests today. First, Gary Nelson. Please stand when I call your name. Gary is our presiding commissioner. Randy Barr, he is the District 1 commissioner. Ray Geringer is going to join us in a few minutes. He had a doctor's appointment. I'd like to ask all past presiding commissioners and commissioners from the past that are here today, if you please stand if we have anyone. Linda, thanks for coming. Any past elected officials like the county clerk, the assessor, I know we have, I see several of you out there, please stand. Thank you very much. Any past employees of the county that went on to retirement? Hi, Donna. How about all of our currently elected officials for the county? If you'd all please stand. You all do a great job in keeping the business of the county moving. Any current employees of the county that aren't elected officials? Oh, very good. I'm wondering if we have the mayors of Bloomsdale or St. Mary here today. Guess not. I'd also like to recognize the Honorable Congresswoman Joanne Emerson as Missouri's 8th Congressional District Representative. Joanne. I know Joanne and her father, Bill, have been longtime supporters of St. Genevieve and St. Genevieve County. And we're glad that you came up to see us today. She has I guess St. Genevieve will become a part of the 8th Congressional District come November this year. Well, thanks to all of you and all of those that have served in leadership positions and employees of the County of St. Genevieve over the last 200 years. You've done a great job. I'd like to introduce some of our speakers today to kind of honor this celebration. And first, I'd like to introduce Gary Nelson. Gary has served as County Commissioner since 2004 and was appointed to the position of Presiding Commissioner last year by Governor Jay Nixon. Gary, you want to come up and say anything?
Do I want to or do I have to? I don't really think I need this. I'd just like to take a minute to thank everybody for coming, especially Bob Mueller, who's been working on this for over 6 months to get this celebration together. We brought a nice crowd together today, and I believe we need a big one.
If I'd known you were going to say that, I wouldn't have invited you. Our next speaker is Mayor Richard Greminger, Mayor of the City of St. Genevieve, Missouri.
Good morning and welcome. And on behalf of the City of St. Genevieve, I'd just like to congratulate the county and all of its residents on reaching this important milestone in history. We're very proud to have the home of the county government in St. Genevieve, and we're very happy. And I'd also like to thank today the county commission and all the county departments on the relationship and the way we work together in the city right now. I think that's as strong as ever right now, and I really appreciate it. Thank you again. Congratulations.
Thanks, Dick. Our next speaker is our Missouri representative, Joseph A. Fowler. Joe has served as our District 104 Missouri House Representative since November 2006. Please welcome Joe Fowler. Also, they're going to do us, twosome here. Missouri Senator Kevin Engler is going to join us. He's represented Senate District 3, of which St. Genevieve is the county is a part since 2004. Previously, he had served in the Missouri House of Representatives from 2002 to 2004. And before that, he was the mayor of the city of Farmington for 6 years. Please welcome Joe and Kevin.
We'll be real brief because that's why we didn't wear jackets today. We planned well. But first of all, I thank everybody for coming out. Thank Bob for all his work to get this done. We have a resolution for the county, and I wished I'd have paid more attention when I was in school, so I know as much about it as he does. But we just like to present these, and I don't know if Kevin's reads exactly the same, but the now therefore be it resolved, I will read that, and then we'll present this to the commissioners. But that we, the members of the Missouri House of Representatives and the 96th General Assembly, join unanimously to applaud the history and accomplishments associated with St. Genevieve County and to convey to all those involved this legislative body's most heartfelt best wishes as they celebrate the 200th anniversary of the creation of that important political subdivision. And on behalf of the Missouri House, and if Kevin wants to, from the Senate, we'll present these.
Yeah, we want to do this together so that save some time for the people with the suits and stuff. I thought we were supposed to have suits, and then these guys told me that they were working part-time at Bosler's after they have to wait later. So it was good of you to come down and do both things today. Thank you so much. This is a great occasion, and we want to present these two, one from the Senate, one from the House, to the county commissioners. Look there. Right that way. Got there from town. For those of you that don't know, I'm going as the Great Pumpkin.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Kevin. I'd like to next introduce Tom Schulte, who's representing U.S. Senator Roy Lund.
Thanks, sir. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I was telling the mayor a while ago, I hate to admit it, that like 20% of this 200-year history, this great history of St. Genevieve, Missouri, I can say I've been associated with throughout my life. My former boss, Kit Bond, then governor, activated us in 1973 for the historic flood, what was then a historic flood. That changed in 93 when he was a U.S. Senator. It was about that same time that Bill Emerson and Jack Danforth and Kit were all working on our design levy along with Congressman Gephardt. We finally achieved that. We still got a little work to do, don't we, Mayor? But eventually we'll get there someday. There's such a rich history here in St. Genevieve. I was talking to Mr. Mueller a while ago, and I was telling him about Kit's ancestors. The Bogie family lived here. He goes, yeah, I'm well acquainted with that because I live in their house. But it is a rich history down the road, Perry County, where Kit Bond's dad lived, or was raised. His grandfather, Sam Bond. Louis Duer in St. Mary's, Missouri, moved to Perryville, sold his general store in St.